And so the doctor had said, well, these two things are big markers. Let's check your blood. And they did my labs on Christmas Eve, 2015, and came back and said, your body's shutting down, your kidneys are failing.
Okay, welcome everybody today. Our next episode of Power to the Patient, we have a remarkable guest, Shana. Thank you so much for joining us. And Shana is actually somewhat known as the Christmas medical miracle. And that is quite an important title. And we're going to share, we thank you so much for joining and sharing your story, because we know it'll help people make choices in their lives who can really do better, feel and function better. And as we know, that health is really so much in our own hands, which you figured out kind of in a challenging way, I think. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Tell us a little bit just about, a little bit about your background. Where do you live? If you want to share your age, you can. What do you do in life besides be a wonderful podcast guest?
Oh, thank you. So I was originally born in Australia, so I do have an accent.
A beautiful one.
Thank you. And I moved to the US in 2003. My background is Portuguese and also East Timorese, which is a country in the Pacific. And I currently live in Southern California, and I'm an advertising executive.
Fantastic. So varied background, interesting life. And you had a major event, which I'm going to just sort of introduce out here in the front, that you are a survivor as a double transplant patient. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yes.
Your kidney and your heart are sort of new in your body. You weren't born with the kidney and at least one of your kidneys, yeah, or maybe both. One kidney, yes, and a heart, which is unbelievably remarkable. And having you with us here today is just an incredible gift, because you may not have been here if it wasn't for some, good fortune or amazing fortune. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually a slew of, people might call it synchronicities, the universe, God, whatever you believe in, a higher power. But it really did feel like we'd done everything humanly possible. And then for a slew of miracles that happened in perfect divine timing, I'd like to say that I am here today.
Incredible. I mean, this is such a gift to have you with us. So thank you so much. We like to start at the beginning before we sort of work up to sort of why that happened, how it happened, and what you chose to take away from that experience, which we know will inspire other people about your choices, post-transplant. We like to start at the beginning, a little bit about like growing up, like who you mentioned, Australian, East Timorese, Portuguese. You have a very varied background. We all grow up in families, and families have different cultures around health. So if you would just share a little bit about who is like in charge of your health, because as little children, we really don't have those choices. So if you can share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, it was really my mom and my grandmother, and really my grandmother as a matriarch of our family, that was in charge of our health, if you will. I come from East Timor as like I say, a country in the Pacific that has an indigenous background. And so a lot of the health remedies that we used were very much about nature and natural. My grandma's been drinking kombucha since the 80s, which we thought was like awful at the time. We thought it stinks, and what is this? And why are you drinking this weird thing? And now we pay $10 a bottle for it, right?
Wow, she was a visionary, your grandmother. That's amazing, yeah, because it's fermented, good for our gut microbiome, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then where I grew up in Australia is a place called Darwin, which is in the tropics. It's very similar weather to Bali. And so a lot of what we had there was jackfruit growing on trees, and we have a lot of herbs and green leafy vegetables that just grow in the garden. And so a lot of our remedies were natural. Like if one of us had stomach issues, we would drink tea from guava leaves. That would be the first thing we'd reach for. So doctors weren't necessarily used unless we had an emergency, really.
Yeah, they were not necessary, right? Because we know this in science, right? That the body, the more we align ourselves with nature, because we are indeed part of nature, although it sometimes doesn't seem like that in our sort of first world countries and our modernization. But when, we're part of nature, we're animals, right? In the kingdom. So when we use things that are plants and not things that are necessarily made in a plant, which are sometimes not even foods, yeah, we kind of get into trouble, right? So we've gotten, unfortunately, very far away from some of those basic things that luckily you grew up with, was just innate. It was part of your culture, as part of your living. So I would imagine you were healthy growing up. Yes, were you born, sort of healthy? And sounds like your mother, grandmother were sort of plugged into some very natural, basic, close to nature ways of living.
Yeah, I'd say overall we were. And the other part was we didn't really come from a very rich or affluent background. And so I think from that standpoint too, you tend to eat more in than you do buying out, and things like that were more by necessity, if you will. But then I also think culturally, so my family were refugees to Australia in 1975, and then I was born in 1980. And so culturally, there was that blend of coming into Australia and bringing some of those practices, but then also having like the Western culture kind of meld together. So growing up, it was a mix of both for at least for me, especially in teenage years and going into early 20s. And then I moved to America. So that was like a whole nother cultural immersion into a whole different set of health rules back in early 2000s.
And what was that like for you coming to America? You live in I think you shared with us, you live in San Diego now. Did you move right to California when you came to the US, or?
I did, Los Angeles.
Yeah. And very different foods, yeah, than when you were growing up. Is that sort of the major change? I mean, sort of the living was different, I'm sure too, but yes, different in food availability and choices, yeah?
Yeah, different. It's just completely different flavor profile, the whole thing. Even the US to Australia is very different. A lot of people will say the bread here in the States tastes like cake to us. Like Australians aren't used to having bread that lasts any longer than 3 or 4 days.
There's no preservatives in it. There's no chemicals.
It's different. Milk, we've never had this many options. Right. It's starting to, but it just was a very different way of life. Australia still very much is a farmland, a very like agricultural focused place. And then when you think about the country has between 20 and 30 million people, there was enough food supply to kind of feed the country. There was never a need to have it be any kind of shortages or anything that needed extra help in the sense of having food growing faster than it's supposed to. And so things like that didn't just has things taste different.
Veering further and further away from nature. And I hear that from my patients often too, is like, I can go to Europe and I eat the bread and it's totally different and I feel totally different because of our unfortunately, highly ultra processed foods, convenience. I mean, there's so many factors going against nature, right? Because a lot of, unfortunately, in our country, so much is directed towards profits, right? So the higher shelf life, the longer shelf life, the processed food. We went through a revolution. I don't know how that, of the sort of industrialized, food systems here, which is literally, and I'm going to sound radical, killing people, really, really killing people, because it's really messing up our health in a very, very big way. And luckily, there's been some small movements towards awareness of this, but this is huge. And what you're saying is huge. And so you felt fine, like for a while in your 20s, like you felt healthy, you were healthy, tell me a
Yeah,
little bit about that.
I think for me, once I came to the States, my focus was a little different. I moved over with the intention of climbing the corporate ladder.
Hmm.
I I'd gotten married and divorced within a year and a half. And it had a real emotional toll on me. So at that point, I'd put on a bunch of weight. I had, my focus was almost 100% work. And I was laughing just last week with a friend saying how cool I thought it was that I got my first BlackBerry and my first parking spot. It was such like a glamour thing. Like people can reach me all the time now.
Oh
Versus
boy, that's the beginning of the end. Yeah, I get it though. We think that when we're growing up, that we're so adult and important, right? Yeah,
right.
Go ahead, tell us more.
Right, exactly. I was saying, like, I remember the first time I got my first parking spot, and I had a friend and we ate lunch in the parking spot. Like, it was such a big stature play of like, now I have my own parking spot so I can come whenever I want to work. And that really was my persona, if you will, throughout that whole time frame, where it was, I'm here. I've moved all the way to America for the opportunity, and I'm here to climb the corporate ladder and do what I came to do and be successful. And so for me, that meant do whatever you had to do, work hard, and, sleep when I'm dead was the phrase.
Wow. Yeah.
And so that's really what I did. And in that process, the way in which I took care of myself really was secondary. And it was short term for me to feel good enough to do what I had to do. And so it was like, if I know I've got a big week coming ahead, let me get my rest on Sunday so that I know that I've got all these hours I'm going to work next week. It was all for the purpose of being able to work in the way that I wanted to. So I was consistently chasing that energy bucket to make sure that I was filled up enough to do that. And then everything else was after work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we would agree that you kind of flip the equation, but you're not alone. There's so many people, right? You get an education, we chase after power, profits. This is how our system kind of works often, right? And we sort of, and when we're young, we can kind of, get away with some of that, but we don't necessarily invest. And I like to always say, health is the first wealth. And if you don't have your health, you're done. Right. And it's sort of, you were sort of blindsided in a giant way, which we're going to get into. But there's lots of people that think that. And I try to, remind my patients, and especially young people, that you really want to invest in yourself and your health, and the other things are really secondary. But I get it. Our culture really kind of flips the equation, and that we just sort of beat ourselves down. I get it. I went through medical school, right? So I didn't sleep. I did working for 36 hours. That's our corporate ladder, right? And then, it takes a toll. The body, we're not machines, right? We're not machines. We need to be cared for. We need to reboot. We need to rest. I always say the sort of 5 or 6 pillars of health. It's our food, our exercise, our managing of stress. It's avoiding risky behaviors, vices, right? Sleep, which is huge. And we think sometimes we could run on 24/7. And that's actually a badge of honor for many people in the corporate world and beyond, even starting a small business, right? We just throw ourselves down at the sacrifice of that. And if we don't keep up, which is a message that, you grew up with, good food and things around you in a very different lifestyle. It sounds like a slower, more sort of in sync with nature lifestyle. But you're certainly not alone. That's and it's hard to talk people out of that, when they're just, on a fierce path. But letting ourselves be, down the list is something that, it's like pay now or pay later,
Yes.
in that, I believe. So, messages and habits, and it sounds like you didn't go to the doctor much. You just kind of were on this sort of tear for professional success. Yes.
Yep. Exactly.
Which you achieved. Yes?
Yeah. Depending on who you are, I guess, and how you look at it. But I won a slew of awards. At the time I was in advertising, and so I was working at an advertising agency, and a lot of my clients were entertainment focused.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much whenever the celebrities felt like engaging, or, it was very ad hoc in that sense, where it could be midnight, it could be 7 a.m, it could be anywhere in between of when we would launch campaigns and run campaigns. And so that was and again, to your point, it was a badge of honor around, like, that's the top of entertainment is, advertising and entertainment together was like glamorous.
Yeah.
And so, it felt good. And to your point, it's very hard to convince a person, at least in my case, in that structure, that there is a different way.
Sure.
Because it sounds crazy. It sounds like there is no possible way that you have time to make every single meal of your entire day from scratch. Like, you cannot tell me.
It's insurmountable. You were there for others. You were a vessel for others. And there's a lot of dopamine that comes along with that. It's exciting. It's 24/7. It's celebrity. It's, and batch cooking. Like, are you serious? Right? You were 24/7, right? 24, go for a walk or a run. Like, no, I've got to be available. I've got to be on, right? Exactly. I've got to be tethered to my BlackBerry, which we were enjoying at the time, right? And this is, you got kind of swept up into that kind of way of living, I would imagine, and probably had no messages about doing it differently, because a lot of people don't until something happens.
Or I had the messages about doing it differently, but it was kind of like, it sounds really good. I definitely want to do yoga every day and, write in my journal. I love that, but it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
And the days that it can, I'll give it a shot, but I'm not banking on it.
Right. So you didn't really make it a priority, right?
No.
And then tell us about when you started maybe not feeling so well, or was there sort of a lead up, or was there an event, or, share with us when you're like, well, maybe I'm on the wrong track.
Yeah. So I will say I never felt like I was on the wrong track.
Okay.
I just felt like something felt off. And that was 2015. So at the beginning of 2015, I'd come off of having a little break over the Christmas period. And I thought to myself, I'm tired. I'm really tired. I just noticed I was really tired. And I thought, I need to sleep, or I need to rest, or I need a vacation. I haven't gone on a vacation in forever. And so I decided to book a trip to Fiji. And a friend of mine was helping me book it. And I said, I want to be like Robinson Crusoe, just out in the middle of nowhere on an island by myself. And he was like, I don't think you're ready for that. Like, I'm not sure if you want to go from this to that. And I said, no, I'm totally ready. I definitely want to do it. And so that's what I did over the Memorial weekend. I had 10 days in Fiji on this island. The minute I got back, I was instantly tired again. And so I thought, okay, that's weird. And I thought, well, maybe I haven't gone long enough, further enough, far enough. So I've got to go to Bali and go vegan and do yoga twice a day. Like, that feels like I'm for sure going to be good. This burnout feeling I've got, I'm for sure going to be good. And so I did 14 days in Bali before Christmas. And Bali's 2 hours away from my hometown. And so I thought I'll do Bali and then I'll go home. And that'll be a solid, month where I've had a decent break. I was still working after Bali, but I thought, oh, it'll be a decent break for me. And it didn't work. I was still really tired. And then Christmas Eve 2015, I felt really, really sick. And I ended up in hospital. And the doctor said, what do you do? And I said, I'm in advertising. And he said, have you been tired lately? And I said, yeah, I have. But I'm in advertising. Like, who isn't tired? And then he said, is your back hurting? And I said, I've just told you I'm in advertising. Like, of course my back hurts. What else is there? And so the doctor had said, well, these two things are big markers. Let's check your blood. And they did my labs on Christmas Eve 2015 and came back and said, your body's shutting down, your kidneys are failing.
Wow.
And I thought, what? Like, you've got to be kidding. This, how? And he was like, I don't know, I'm asking you. I was like,
it's your body. How old were you at the time?
I was
about
34.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah. I just was like, I don't know what happened. And that was the first time that I had, people have asked me whether I've had an out-of-body experience. That was the moment I had the out-of-body experience. Whereas sitting there on Christmas Eve, I clearly couldn't sleep. And I saw myself and how I speak to myself.
Wow. That's
and
profound.
It was really profound. It was, I'm hungry. Oh, you don't need to eat right now. Just do the next couple of meetings, then grab something, then you'll go to your 4 o'clock. Or I'm thirsty. Well, let me just finish this phone call. Then I'll go get a water and then I'll come back and I'll do the other 2 phone calls. Or I need to pee. Okay, I think I can hold it for another 2 hours. Let me just get through this next couple of pieces of work that I've got to do. Then I'll go and pee. Then I'll grab water and then I'll grab food and I'll bring it all back together and I'll be at my desk this whole time. And I could hear it on loudspeaker. And that night I heard it for hours of just all these one-liners.
Wow.
That I had said, that I consistently said to myself, down to, let me just finish these 5 emails, then I'll go to sleep and then I'll catch up on sleep on the weekend. But if I can just get through this next 2 days, I'll be good on Thursday, or I'll be better on Monday, or whatever that was. It was a constant chase.
Wow. So you were like suppressing all of those signals from your body for years, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And now it came back to you like in a running script almost.
Yeah. And I'd say I was aware of them, but it was an inner conversation that I thought was acceptable to have with myself. I just thought that's what people did.
Yeah.
That's just me organizing my day. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go next and who I'm going to see. And if I do this first and if I go there second, and if I get in the car and the GPS says it's going to take 45 minutes, I'm like, no, I have to take 40. So let me like cut this shortcut and get there in time. Because if I get the 5 minutes, I can have lunch. Like it was a running.
Always a race. Yeah. There was no rebooting. There was no stopping. There was no fueling, right? Yeah.
And a consistent conversation that I thought everyone had. Well, like, how else did you organize your day? If you don't have these options that you're choosing your own adventure as you're going, how do you get anything done was my thought process.
Constantly pushing.
Constantly.
Okay. And then what happened at the hospital?
So they stabilized me for 4 days and then I came back to the US. And at that point, I was in a deep silence. It was just like as if all the noise had diminished and all I could hear was how I talked to myself. And then I had a bunch of new questions where I was like, why didn't I go to the doctor all these years? And then answers would come up like, I hated the doctor's office and the smell.
Understandable.
Well, why didn't I just go find a different one? Like it was all these things that I just felt, and all these revelations started coming. So in a first of the many synchronicities, Well, might have not have been the first, actually. This might have been the second or the third. But I had done work for the National Kidney Foundation 2 years before.
Wow.
And I knew the head of the Kidney Foundation for Southern California. And so she was my first phone call. And little did I know 2 years later, I was going to need her help. And she had said, okay, here are the board members that are the best nephrologists in Los Angeles. You can go and see them, speak to this person and that person. But my first thought was, if I didn't have her, I would never have, how do I even know the process? Who would I reach out to first? Like, where do I go? Then I get a Facebook ad that was for One Medical. And I instantly called them and I said, I want a doctor who's been to both UCLA and Cedars, that has learned from both because of the proximity to where I was, and that treats the whole person. I want a 360-degree view. And that's where I met Dr. Jackie Yaris, and she was amazing for me. She sat me down. I was expecting a guilt trip. I was expecting her to say, you haven't taken care of yourself. You needed to do all these things. You didn't go to the doctor. And so I'd psyched myself up for it. And she sat me down and said, you are clearly someone who takes care of everything else. Now it's my job and I'm going to take care of you. We're going to surround you with a team. And that team of specialists is going to get you completely sorted out. And she said, in the next 2 days, we're going to work up everything there is to work up. And that was my first interaction with a doctor where I felt like, wow, she really gets me.
That is beautiful and basic, but unfortunately that doesn't really happen in our system. And lucky you. First of all, I just want to comment on two things, if I may. You're obviously super intelligent, but to have that flip of awareness and know to advocate for yourself and what you needed at that time. So it sounds to me like you always knew it, but you kind of pressed it down because of the other demands of your sort of days and lifestyle and goals, and which a lot of people do. Super common behavior. But you knew, hey, you had a moment, right? It flipped for you. This is serious. I need help. And I know what I need. And luckily, you sought it out and the people appeared. And I just want to, amazing of that doctor. That should be a sort of universal experience for everybody going into the healthcare system. But unfortunately, as we know, that doesn't happen for so many reasons, which we could have a whole other podcast and conversation about that. But how did that feel for you, for her to just sort of put you, it sounds like she really put you at ease and you felt taken care of, like the burden, you taking care of all these celebrities and work stuff and putting yourself last, you accepted that from her? Yes? Because you needed it.
Yeah. And she tied a bow on it by saying, you didn't choose your body. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose your body. Stuff that you've got genetically. You didn't choose the makeup. You didn't choose the genes that you had that do what they do. And so she said, either way, we're going to get a group of people around you. And that's what she did. And then my first round of nephrologists, I didn't like the first three. And I started to realize, and this came in my executive training, I started to realize I can interview doctors and I can fire them off of my doctor team. That is an actual thing where I can say, I don't feel comfortable with this doctor. I want a different one, and actually have a choice versus the one that comes on the paper that I got referred from the last doctor that sent me to the next one, or insurance that said, here's your doctor of choice. Like, I could actually choose. And so that's what I started doing, was I started to get really clear on what, over and above their medical experience, because the one thing all the doctors had in common were they're very experienced. They knew what they were talking about. There was nothing wrong with what they were sharing, but it was in the how, and it was in the value system. So I started to look for doctors who, one, couldn't sleep unless they solved a problem. That liked challenging issues, that wanted to discover something new, that were into medical research and evolving that were connected both from a medical standpoint, but also understood the non-medical factors that contribute to symptoms and to health. And then the fourth one was, I want